A wedding veiled in secrets. The soft golden light of mid-morning streamed through the high stained glass windows of St. Augustine's Cathedral, casting a kaleidoscope of colors onto the polished wooden floors. The grand hall stood in hushed anticipation, adorned with flowing white silk, delicate golden accents, and towering floral arrangements of blush roses, ivory peonies, and soft lavender. The air carried the intoxicating scent of fresh petals and the faint remnants of incense from the morning mass. Today was supposed to be the happiest day of Jessica Whitmore's life. Inside the lavish bridal suite, a whirlwind of last-minute preparations surrounded her, but Jessica felt strangely disconnected from it all. She sat before an ornate mirror, watching as the reflection of a woman, beautiful, poised, yet oddly distant, stared back at her. The fitted lace bodice of her gown hugged her frame elegantly, the satin skirt cascading around her like liquid silk. A pearl-studded comb secured her long, dark waves, and a delicate veil draped softly over her shoulders. Yet beneath the surface of elegance and perfection, a quiet, gnawing unease whispered in the back of her mind. Her mother, Florence, fussed over the hem of the gown, smoothing the intricate lace with careful fingers. "Look at you," she murmured, stepping back with misty eyes. "You're the most beautiful bride I've ever seen." Jessica forced a smile, but it felt wrong on her lips. "Thank you, Mama." A heavy knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. The door creaked open, and her father, James Whitmore, entered, his broad shoulders and salt and pepper hair lending him an air of dignified strength. In his hands was a small velvet-worn box. "I have something for you," he said, his deep voice warm with emotion. Jessica turned, swallowing hard as he approached. He opened the box to reveal a delicate bracelet, a single tiny diamond glistening on a thin silver chain. "This belonged to your mother on her wedding day," he murmured, fastening it gently around Jessica's wrist. "And now, it's yours." Jessica stared at the bracelet, her fingers tracing the cool metal. "Dad," her voice wavered. "You're going to be so happy, sweetheart," her father said with certainty, squeezing her hand. Happy. The word rang hollow in her chest. She wanted to be happy. She had spent years believing she had found the love of her life. Ethan Calloway was charming, successful, and the kind of man who turned heads when he entered a room. He knew how to make a woman feel like she was the only one in the world. But something wasn't right. Something inside her screamed for her to stop, to listen to that tiny voice of doubt. A sharp rap on the door interrupted her thoughts. The wedding coordinator peeked in, smiling brightly. "Jessica, the groom's party has arrived. It's almost time." The room buzzed with excitement as her bridesmaids gathered around, adjusting veils, fluffing the dress, and handing her the bouquet. A stunning arrangement of peonies, roses, and lilies. Lily, her best friend and maid of honor, was the last to approach. "You ready?" Lily asked, studying her closely. "You look, I don't know, different." Jessica forced another smile. "I'm just nervous." Lily hesitated. "Jess, if something doesn't feel right, you can always—" "I'm fine," Jessica interrupted, gripping the bouquet a little too tightly. "I just need a minute alone." Lily nodded slowly. "All right. But if you need me, I'm right here." As soon as the door closed, Jessica exhaled shakily. Her heart pounded, but she didn't know why. Maybe fresh air would help. She slipped out of the suite and down the dimly lit hallway, the hem of her gown trailing behind her as she made her way toward the small private courtyard. And that's when she heard it. Voices. She froze. One of them was Ethan's. The other, a woman's. Jessica's stomach twisted into a knot as she instinctively pressed herself against the stone wall, hidden by the cascading ivy. "She doesn't suspect a thing." Ethan's voice carried through the quiet courtyard. Jessica's grip on her bouquet tightened. A soft laugh followed. "You're sure you want to go through with this?" the woman asked. Jessica's blood ran cold. "Of course," Ethan said smoothly. "She's perfect on paper, beautiful, well-connected, and exactly what I need for my career. My father adores her. It's the perfect arrangement." Jessica's breath caught in her throat. Her heart pounded so hard she feared they would hear it. The woman sighed. "So you're just using her?" Ethan chuckled. "It's not like that. Look, I need this marriage. My company's investors see her as a stabilizing influence. Marriage to someone like her gives me credibility. Someone who looks good on my arm at events, who comes from a respected family. It's all strategic." Jessica's fingers dug into the bouquet, stems so hard she thought they might snap. "And what about us?" the woman asked. Ethan's voice softened, almost affectionate. "You know you're the one I really want. Just give me some time, and I'll make sure we're together, no matter what." The woman exhaled slowly. "I don't want to be a secret forever." "You won't be," Ethan reassured her. "Just let me lock this in first. Then we can figure things out." Jessica felt the world tilt beneath her feet. Her mind spun. Her vision blurred. This wasn't real. This couldn't be real. Her fiancé, the man she had loved, trusted, and planned a future with, was using her. He didn't love her. He never had. A sharp pain shot through her chest. But she didn't cry. She didn't storm in. She didn't scream. Instead, she smiled. A slow, chilling smile. She straightened her shoulders, lifted her chin, and took a deep, calming breath. If Ethan Calloway thought he could humiliate her, use her like a pawn in his game, he was gravely mistaken. She would not be the heartbroken bride who ran away in tears. She would not be the woman scorned who begged for an explanation. No, she would get married, and then she would destroy him. With that decision solidified in her mind, Jessica turned on her heel and made her way back to the bridal suite. Her heart no longer pounded in fear. Now it pulsed with something else. Power. The wedding would go on. But it wouldn't be the wedding Ethan expected. The vow of deception. Jessica walked back toward the bridal suite, her veil trailing behind her like a ghostly whisper. Her heart should have been pounding. Her breath should have been shaky. But instead, she felt an eerie sense of calm. Every step she took solidified her decision. This wasn't going to be the wedding Ethan expected. She reached the suite and pushed open the heavy oak doors. Her bridesmaids turned, their faces lighting up, completely unaware that Jessica's entire world had just shattered and reformed itself into something new. "There you are." Lily rushed toward her, a worried expression crossing her delicate features. "Are you okay? You look a little off." Jessica smiled, a soft, knowing smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I'm perfect." Lily's brow furrowed, but before she could question further, the wedding coordinator peeked in again. "It's time." A ripple of excitement spread through the room. Bridesmaids adjusted their dresses, florists checked the bouquet, and Jessica's mother fussed with the edge of her veil. The grand moment had arrived. Jessica inhaled deeply and walked toward her father, who stood waiting just outside the doors leading into the main hall of the cathedral. The ceremony was set to take place under the vaulted ceiling, where golden light cascaded over rows of elegantly dressed guests. Everyone was waiting for her. Her father looked at her and smiled proudly. "You ready, sweetheart?" Jessica looped her arm through his, squeezing gently. More than ever. The music swelled, and the grand doors swung open. Gasps of admiration filled the hall as Jessica stepped forward, radiant in her wedding gown. Her eyes locked onto Ethan at the end of the aisle. He looked perfect. He wore a crisp black tuxedo, his hair neatly styled, his expression that of a man eager to claim his prize. To anyone else, he was the picture of a devoted groom. But Jessica knew the truth. She saw the slight tension in his jaw. He hadn't expected her to go through with the wedding. Maybe, just maybe, a part of him had worried she would somehow find out about his betrayal before today. Oh, if only he knew. She took slow, deliberate steps toward him, her face composed, her heart ice-cold. Every single guest in this room thought they were witnessing the most beautiful love story come to life. They had no idea. When she finally reached Ethan, he took her hand, his fingers warm against hers. His grip was steady, confident, arrogant. She looked up at him, her lips curving slightly. "Let the game begin." The officiant smiled warmly, his voice filling the cathedral as he began the ceremony. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today to celebrate the union of Ethan Calloway and Jessica Whitmore." Jessica barely listened. Her mind was already forming a plan, her thoughts weaving together the perfect storm of revenge. She could feel Ethan's eyes on her, searching for something, maybe reassurance that she was still blissfully unaware. She would give him exactly what he expected. She smiled sweetly, tilting her head just slightly, playing the role of the devoted bride as the officiant droned on about love, trust, and partnership. Ethan squeezed her hand gently. And that's when she made her first move. She squeezed back, but just a little too tight. Ethan's brows furrowed ever so slightly, but the moment passed before he could fully process it. The ceremony continued. Vows were exchanged. Jessica listened with detached amusement as Ethan recited his, speaking of honor, love, and eternal devotion. Lies. Every single word. Then it was her turn. She took a breath, looking into Ethan's eyes. He expected her to say something sweet, something poetic. Instead, she leaned in slightly, just enough that only he could hear. Her lips barely moved as she whispered, "I know." Ethan stiffened. Jessica smiled softly, tilting her head in innocent adoration as she continued, her voice loud enough for the guests to hear. "I vow to be honest with you always, to cherish the love we share, and to stand by your side, no matter what comes our way." She saw it then, the flicker of panic in his eyes. A bead of sweat formed at his temple. He didn't know what she knew. He only knew that something was wrong. And that was exactly where she wanted him. The officiant continued, moving toward the final part of the ceremony. "By the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may now kiss the bride." A hush fell over the room. Ethan hesitated. Jessica did not. She reached up, took his face in her hands, and kissed him. Soft, slow, deliberate. It was the kind of kiss that looked like love, the kind that made every guest in the cathedral sigh with admiration. Only Ethan could feel the difference. Only he could feel the ice beneath her touch. When she pulled away, her lips curled at the corner ever so slightly. Ethan swallowed hard. For the first time in their entire relationship, he was the one afraid. The applause was deafening as they turned to face the crowd, now officially husband and wife. Guests cheered, flower petals rained down from above, and the grand doors swung open to lead them toward their new life together. Ethan took Jessica's hand as they stepped into the light. He had no idea that his nightmare had just begun. The reception. A dance with the devil. The reception was held at the luxurious Whitmore estate, a sprawling property with marble columns, crystal chandeliers, and gardens that stretched endlessly under the golden afternoon sun. Everything was extravagant, flawless, just as Ethan had wanted. Jessica played her role masterfully. She laughed at the right moments, toasted with grace, and danced with the elegance of a woman deeply in love. Ethan, however, was unraveling. He watched her closely, searching for any sign, any clue. She could feel his anxiety mounting with every passing minute. The first dance was announced. Jessica took Ethan's hand, leading him to the center of the ballroom. The music swelled, the soft melody filling the space as guests looked on in admiration. Jessica rested her head against Ethan's chest, her voice just loud enough for him to hear. "Do you know what's funny?" she murmured. Ethan tensed. Jessica's fingers traced the edge of his lapel. "I heard something interesting this morning." His grip on her waist tightened. "Jessica." She tilted her head up, eyes shining with amusement. "You're a terrible liar, Ethan." His breath hitched. Jessica smiled, her lips brushing the shell of his ear as she whispered, "Enjoy the reception, my love. It's the last thing you'll ever control." Ethan pulled back, panic flickering in his eyes, but Jessica only twirled gracefully in his arms, laughing softly as though nothing was wrong. The guests saw only a perfect couple, lost in their wedding bliss. They had no idea that beneath the surface, war had begun. And Jessica, she was going to win. The beginning of the end. The ballroom of the Whitmore estate shimmered under the glow of golden chandeliers. Lush floral arrangements adorned every table, and the air buzzed with laughter, clinking glasses, and the occasional burst of applause as guests toasted to the newlyweds. Everything was perfect, on the surface. Jessica moved through the room with effortless grace, thanking guests, smiling at well-wishers, and allowing herself to be twirled by enthusiastic relatives on the dance floor. She played her part flawlessly, never once allowing the storm inside her to show. Ethan, however, wasn't faring as well. From across the room, she caught him stealing nervous glances her way, his smile tight, his posture rigid. He hadn't expected her to go through with the wedding. He certainly hadn't expected the whispered threat during their first dance. And now, for the first time in his life, Ethan Calloway, Mr. Confident, Mr. Charming, was afraid. Good. Jessica picked up a champagne flute from a nearby tray, took a slow sip, and let her eyes flicker to the far side of the room. There she was, her, the other woman, the brunette in the emerald dress. Jessica had noticed her the moment she entered the reception. While the other guests had been lost in the joy of the celebration, this woman had been watching Ethan, watching them. Jessica had memorized her face before she'd even learned her name. Delicate features, high cheekbones, full lips that, at the moment, were pressed into a tight line of unease. Jessica smiled to herself. "Oh, sweetheart, you have no idea what's coming." The DJ's voice rang out over the speakers. "All right, ladies and gentlemen, let's get the bouquet toss started. Who's ready to be the next lucky bride?" A cheer rose from the crowd. Jessica handed her champagne flute to a passing server and made her way to the center of the dance floor. Bridesmaids, single women, and a few overenthusiastic older guests gathered behind her. Ethan's mistress stood near the back of the crowd. Jessica turned, holding her bouquet in one hand as she cast a glance at Ethan, who stood stiffly near the head table, his hands clenched at his sides. Their eyes met. Jessica's lips curled ever so slightly. And then, with an effortless flick of her wrist, she tossed the bouquet directly into the waiting hands of the other woman. The gasps were audible. Ethan's mistress froze, her face draining of color as she looked down at the flowers in her hands. Whispers spread like wildfire through the guests. Jessica turned back, her expression one of innocent delight. "Oh, looks like we have a winner." The woman looked up, her eyes wide with panic. Jessica took a step forward, closing the distance between them. She leaned in slightly, just enough that only the other woman could hear. "I thought you didn't want to be a secret forever," Jessica murmured, her voice silky smooth. "Congratulations, darling. You're part of the show now." The woman's breath hitched. Jessica pulled back and clapped her hands together. "Now let's get a dance for the lucky lady and her future groom." The crowd erupted into laughter and cheers, clueless to the real weight of Jessica's words. The DJ quickly queued up a playful love song, and guests whooped and encouraged Ethan's mistress to step forward. The woman shot a desperate glance at Ethan. But Ethan, he was pale, frozen, helpless. For the first time since Jessica had met him, he had no control. And it was delicious. The song played on, the guests oblivious to the growing tension. Jessica made her way back to the head table, where Ethan was still standing, his jaw clenched so tightly she thought it might crack. She picked up her champagne flute and sipped slowly. Ethan finally turned to her, his voice low and strained. "What are you doing?" Jessica swirled the liquid in her glass, feigning thoughtfulness. "Oh, just making sure you get everything you ever wanted, darling. Isn't that what today is about?" His fists curled at his sides. "Jessica, this isn't what?" She tilted her head. "What you expected." Ethan's nostrils flared, his panic barely contained. We need to talk. Now." Jessica set her flute down and folded her hands on the table, smiling sweetly. "Oh, but we have guests, Ethan. You wouldn't want to be rude." Ethan leaned in closer, his voice sharp with desperation. "Enough games. What do you want?" Jessica's expression didn't waver. She lifted her hand, showing off the glimmering wedding band on her finger. "I already have everything I want." Ethan exhaled, frustration flickering in his eyes. "Jessica, I—" Before he could say another word, a well-meaning uncle interrupted, clapping Ethan on the shoulder and dragging him into a toast. Jessica watched as her husband struggled to regain his composure, plastering on a fake smile as their guests raised their glasses. She let the moment stretch out, savoring it. Then, when Ethan finally caught her gaze again, she raised her champagne flute in his direction and winked. The first strike. As the reception carried on, Jessica excused herself from the main ballroom. She needed a moment to prepare for what was coming next. She stepped into a quiet hallway, away from the music and chatter, and pulled out her phone. There was one more piece to set in motion. She scrolled through her messages and found the contact she was looking for. Anonymous number. "I have something you might want to see." She attached the audio file, the recording she had taken in the courtyard, the one where Ethan had confessed everything to his mistress. She hit send. Her stomach buzzed with anticipation as the message delivered. Seconds later, a response came in. Anonymous number. "Who is this?" Jessica smiled. "Jessica, you'll find out soon enough. Enjoy." She slid her phone back into her clutch and exhaled slowly. This was just the beginning. The walls Ethan had built around himself were about to come crumbling down, and she would make sure he felt every second of it. The unraveling. The Whitmore estate was alive with celebration. Laughter echoed through the grand ballroom. Champagne glasses clinked together in joyous toasts, and the rhythmic beats of the music kept guests swaying on the dance floor. It was, by all appearances, the picture-perfect wedding reception. But beneath the surface, cracks were beginning to form. Jessica stood at the edge of the ballroom, watching the night unfold with an air of quiet amusement. She had spent years meticulously planning this wedding, believing it would be the happiest day of her life. Now, it was something else entirely. It was the stage for Ethan Calloway's downfall. Her phone vibrated in her clutch. She retrieved it discreetly and checked the screen. Anonymous number. "You're not playing, are you?" Jessica's lips curled as she typed a response. "Jessica, not at all. The real show starts now." She slid her phone away just as Lily appeared at her side, holding a glass of wine and wearing a suspicious expression. "You're too calm," Lily murmured, studying Jessica's face. "You're supposed to be the happiest bride in the world, and yet you look like a woman with a plan." Jessica gave a small laugh, swirling the champagne in her glass. "Maybe I do." Lily's gaze sharpened. "Jess, is something going on?" Jessica considered telling her the truth. Lily, after all, had been her best friend since childhood. But not yet. Not now. Lily needed to see it unfold like everyone else. Jessica smiled. "Nothing at all. I'm just savoring the moment." Lily narrowed her eyes. "Mum." Before she could probe further, a commotion near the head table caught their attention. Ethan was speaking in hushed but heated tones with one of the event staff, his posture tense, his jaw clenched. Jessica strolled closer, just in time to hear the conversation. "What do you mean someone sent it to them?" Ethan snapped, his voice low but furious. The staff member, clearly uncomfortable, cleared his throat. "Sir, we've received multiple complaints. Your father, Mr. Calloway Sr., is asking for you immediately." Jessica felt her pulse quicken in delight. The time had come. She followed at a distance as Ethan stormed toward a private lounge where his father and several high-profile guests had gathered. She stopped just outside the doorway, remaining hidden in the shadows. Inside, Ethan's father, Richard Calloway, stood near the fireplace, his face a storm of barely contained rage. Several board members from Ethan's company, along with other wealthy investors, were seated in tense silence, all staring at Ethan. "What the hell is this?" Richard growled, holding up a tablet screen. Jessica tilted her head slightly, catching a glimpse of the displayed video. The audio recording. The very one she had sent. The room was thick with tension as the recording played, Ethan's voice clear and undeniable. "She doesn't suspect a thing. She's perfect on paper. Beautiful, well-connected, exactly what I need for my career. My father adores her. It's the perfect arrangement." Silence followed. Ethan's face had lost all color. Richard slammed the tablet down onto the table. "Do you have any idea what this looks like? The Calloway name is built on legacy and integrity, and now you've publicly humiliated yourself and this family." "Dad, this isn't what it looks like," Ethan began, his voice desperate. One of the board members scoffed. "It looks exactly how it sounds, Calloway. And it's making us reconsider everything." Jessica leaned against the wall outside, sipping her champagne, relishing every second. Inside, Ethan struggled to regain control. "This is clearly a setup. Someone's trying to ruin me." "Oh, I'd say you did a fine job of that yourself," one of the investors muttered. Richard's glare could have burned through steel. "We've worked for decades to build our reputation, and now I have reporters already reaching out for a statement. Who leaked this?" Ethan had no answer. He ran a shaky hand through his hair, sweat forming at his temples. And then, as if sensing something, he turned toward the doorway. Jessica stepped into the light. The room fell silent. Ethan's eyes met hers, and for the first time, true fear flickered behind them. Jessica smiled. "Oh, darling," she purred, stepping forward. "You look like you've seen a ghost." Richard turned toward her, his brows furrowed. "Jessica, do you know anything about this?" Jessica placed a delicate hand on Ethan's shoulder, her fingers just barely grazing his tuxedo. "I know my husband is a very ambitious man," she mused. "And I know he has interesting ideas about love and marriage." Ethan tensed. "Jessica." She ignored him, turning toward his father instead. "But most of all, I know that your investors value loyalty and integrity. And they certainly don't approve of a man who uses his wife as a stepping stone." Richard's eyes darkened. "Is it true?" Jessica's smile didn't falter. "Oh, it's all true." She glanced around the room. "And now, so does everyone else." The board members murmured among themselves. The weight of the scandal was settling in. Jessica could see the consequences forming in real time. Richard exhaled sharply and turned to his son. "We'll discuss this later. For now, salvage what you can of this disaster." The meeting dissolved, guests leaving in hushed tones, throwing Ethan pitiful or judgmental glances. Jessica, however, remained exactly where she was. Ethan waited until they were alone before turning to her, his eyes dark with rage. "You did this." Jessica sipped the last of her champagne. "Oh, honey," she murmured, placing the empty flute on a nearby table. "You did this to yourself." Ethan took a step forward, but she didn't back away. She never would again. "You think you've won," he hissed. Jessica smirked. "Oh, sweetheart, this was just the first strike." She leaned in close, her lips just inches from his ear. "I'm only getting started." Ethan's breath hitched, and for the first time, he was the one who felt powerless. Jessica turned and walked away, leaving him standing in the wreckage of his own making. The reception music played on. The guests continued to dance, laugh, and drink. But for Ethan Calloway, the celebration was over. And for Jessica, the real fun had just begun. Checkmate. The reception was winding down, but the energy in the Whitmore estate remained electric. Laughter echoed from the ballroom, glasses clinked in endless toasts, and guests continued celebrating what they believed was a perfect union. But in the shadows, a different game was unfolding. Jessica had left Ethan reeling in the private lounge, his reputation crumbling before his eyes. Now she moved through the grand estate with a renewed sense of power. Her wedding had become a battleground, and she was the queen, orchestrating every move. As she made her way toward the garden terrace, a familiar voice stopped her. Jessica. She turned slowly, already knowing who it was. The woman in the emerald dress. Ethan's mistress. Jessica allowed herself a small smile. "Enjoying the reception?" she asked lightly. The woman hesitated, clearly thrown off by Jessica's calm demeanor. "I need to talk to you." Jessica tilted her head. "About what?" The woman's throat bobbed as she swallowed hard. I didn't mean for this to happen." Jessica raised an eyebrow. "Didn't mean for what to happen?" "To sleep with my husband. To help him deceive me. To stand in the shadows while he used me like a pawn." Her tone remained pleasant, but the sharpness underneath was undeniable. The woman flinched. I didn't know he was using you like that. I thought we." Jessica gave a short laugh. "Oh, you thought you were special." She stepped closer, her voice lowering to a whisper. "Darling, Ethan would have done the same thing to you in time. He only ever looks out for himself." Tears welled up in the woman's eyes. "I swear, I didn't know." Jessica sighed, as if considering something. Then she leaned in slightly. "Tell me, would you like a chance to make things right?" The woman blinked, clearly confused. "What do you mean?" Jessica smiled, the kind of smile a hunter gives before striking. "You'll see." Before the mistress could respond, Jessica turned and walked away, her mind already calculating her next move. The final nail in the coffin. An hour later, the remaining guests were being ushered into the ballroom for the final toast of the night. Jessica took her place at the head table, watching as Ethan approached hesitantly, his mask of confidence barely holding together. Jessica stood, tapping her champagne glass with a fork. The room fell into a hush. "I just want to take a moment to thank everyone for being here tonight," she began, her voice smooth and strong. "This has been a night to remember." Soft laughter rippled through the crowd. Jessica's gaze flicked toward Ethan. He was watching her closely, waiting, dreading what she might do next. She smiled sweetly. And what better way to end the night than with a gift? She gestured toward one of the large projector screens positioned at the side of the ballroom. "Ethan, darling, I put together something special for you." Ethan's entire body went rigid. The lights dimmed. A video began to play. At first, the screen showed pictures of their relationship, romantic vacations, candlelit dinners, stolen kisses. Guests sighed in admiration. But then, the images faded, and the audio began. "She doesn't suspect a thing. She's perfect on paper, beautiful, well-connected, exactly what I need for my career. My father adores her. It's the perfect arrangement." A stunned silence fell over the room. Jessica watched as expressions shifted, guests looking at one another in confusion, shock, disgust. The recording continued. "I need this marriage. My company's investors see her as a stabilizing influence. Marriage to someone like her gives me credibility. Someone who looks good on my arm at events, who comes from a respected family. It's all strategic." Murmurs filled the ballroom. Jessica turned to Ethan, who was frozen in place, his face drained of all color. "And once everything settles, well, you and I will figure something out." Jessica stepped forward, taking the microphone from the stand. "You know, when I first heard this, I was devastated," she admitted, her voice carrying over the crowd. "I thought I had married a man who loved me. But instead," she gestured toward the screen, "I married this." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Ethan finally found his voice. "Jessica, this is a lie. It's been edited." Jessica held up a hand, silencing him effortlessly. "Oh, darling, we both know that's not true." She turned toward the guests. "I want to thank you all for coming tonight. I truly do. But I'm afraid there's been a change of plans." She paused, savoring the moment. "This is no longer a wedding reception." Ethan's breathing grew ragged. Jessica lifted her glass. "This is a divorce party." The ballroom erupted into chaos. Laughter, Gasps, shocked whispers. Ethan's father stormed out, his face a mask of fury. Investors followed, shaking their heads in disgust. Some guests stood in stunned silence, while others applauded. Jessica downed the last of her champagne and turned toward Ethan, who stood rooted to the spot, his world collapsing around him. She leaned in one last time. "I told you," she murmured, her voice silk and steel. "You'd never see it coming." And with that, Jessica turned and walked away, leaving behind the ruins of Ethan Calloway's carefully constructed empire. Tonight, he had lost everything. And Jessica, she had won.